I stood in my own living room, the scent of fresh lemon polish still lingering in the air, when my son Grant delivered the words that would change everything. "We already decided," he said like it was nothing. "Melissa, the kids, and her mom are moving in next week. You'll stay in the guest room for now." For a moment, I thought I'd misheard. The guest room. My hands still damp from washing, the breakfast dishes curled instinctively into fists at my sides. I had bought this house when I was 52. I remember the exact day, a cool April morning after 27 years as a public high school principal, scraping every bonus severance and side tutoring check into that down payment. When Grant and Melissa got married, I gifted them the deed on the condition that I could stay after retirement in the same home I built from the ground up. They smiled, nodded, hugged me like I was everything. Now here he stood, hands in his pockets like a stranger delivering a memo. Melissa wasn't even present. She had sent Grant with the message, the way someone sends a courier to deliver an eviction notice. "It just makes more sense, Mom," he continued. "You're by yourself, and they're cramped in the apartment. We'll make better use of the space." The space. He meant my home, my kitchen where I baked birthday cakes for him every year until he was 23, my den with the worn recliner where I fell asleep grading essays, my garden I planted with care each spring, not just for flowers, but for peace. I blinked once, slowly. Melissa's mother. I asked as calmly as I could. "She lost her lease," he said. "We're helping her out. Look, it'll just be better for everyone. We thought about it a lot. We, not me." Not once did he ask what I wanted. Not once did he consider if I was willing. His voice was calm, almost robotic, like he'd rehearsed this in the car, and thought that if he said it with enough certainty, I'd just nod along and shuffle quietly to the corner they assigned me. He gave me a pat on the shoulder before leaving, as if I were a dog that had finally been told where to sleep. That night, I went to the safe in my closet and pulled out the house deed. The paper was yellowing slightly at the edges, but the ink hadn't faded. I sat cross-legged on my bedroom rug, the safe door open beside me, and held the deed in my lap like a sleeping infant. My glasses slid low on my nose as I read the lines aloud quietly to myself. Revocable joint tenancy, survivorship rights reserved, controlling interest, Eudora M. Whitmore. I remembered the conversation with the notary like it had happened last week. I was still working, then barely considering retirement, but wise enough to know the difference between trust and legal protection. Add them to the deed, I told her, but I want to retain control in case things ever go sideways. Sideways. What an innocent word for what was happening now. I unfolded the second page. Melissa's signature, neat and compact, sat beside Grant's blocky scrawl. Mine came last, bold, decisive. I remembered feeling foolish that day, wondering if I was being too controlling, too paranoid. But now, with those lines staring back at me, I felt nothing but relief. I hadn't given them the house, I'd given them access. And access could be revoked. I ran a finger down the final line, whispering the date, April 3rd, 2011. They hadn't read the fine print, or maybe they assumed I'd never invoke it. But the law didn't care what people assumed, and neither would I, not this time. I gathered the papers, slid them back into their plastic sleeve, and tucked them into my purse instead of the safe. I wouldn't be locking this away again. The house was still mine. More than that, my voice still counted. The next morning, before the sun had fully risen, I made coffee, put on my slate gray wool coat, and dialed a number I hadn't used in over 5 years. When she picked up, her voice was groggy but warm. "Eudora Whitmore," I said evenly. "I need to schedule a consultation. Today, if you can." Melissa poured herself a cup of coffee like she'd been doing it in my kitchen for years. "We've been thinking about how to make things work for everyone," she said, stirring in vanilla creamer from my fridge. "Since your schedule's pretty open, you could help out with the kids a bit, just after school mostly. Layla's a handful when she's tired." She smiled like this was some casual arrangement between equals. I sat across from her fingers, curled tightly around my mug. My oatmeal had gone cold. "You mean babysitting," I said carefully. Not just that, she continued, brushing off my words. "There's the grocery runs, doctor appointments, stuff like that. It's just easier if someone's here. You know, you'd still have your room, of course. Of course." Grant walked in halfway through her monologue, kissed her on the cheek, and joined us at the table, like this was just another normal morning in the Whitmore household. "Mom, we appreciate your flexibility," he said, cutting into toast that I didn't offer him. "Melissa's mom is getting older. You know how tight that apartment is. And honestly, it just makes sense. Everyone under one roof. You're not alone. We're not stretched. It works for all of us. All of us." Not once had anyone asked me if I was okay with the arrangement. If I wanted to trade quiet mornings and books on the porch for spilled milk and bedtime tantrums. If I wanted to spend my retirement folding someone else's laundry. They had drawn up their version of the future like a business proposal and penciled me in at the bottom, somewhere between housekeeper and backup emergency contact. "I see," I said, finally pushing my chair back. "I'll think it over." I walked down the hall to my room, the one I used to call the master before they renamed it the back one. I closed the door, sat on the edge of the bed, and breathed deeply. My name was still on the deed. That was more than they knew. And that meant I still had time. It started with my teapot. One morning, I went to make my usual jasmine blend, and it was gone. In its place sat a newer, shinier contraption that beeped and steamed like a miniature spaceship. Melissa smiled when I asked. "Oh, I boxed up the old one," she said. "It was chipped. I figured you wouldn't mind." I minded. Next went the armchair, the soft blue one with the dipped cushion and worn edges, the one I'd sat in every night for nearly 2 decades, had simply vanished, replaced by a taupe sectional with more seating. When I asked where it had gone, Grant just shrugged. "We moved it to the garage to make room. Mom, you barely use it." Then it was the photos frames, removed from the hallway, replaced with smiling shots of Melissa's kids. Layla in a tutu, Max with spaghetti on his face. No trace of the life I had built here. No trace of my children when they were little. It was like I had never existed inside these walls. Melissa's mother, Doreen, took to calling me Han in the patronizing way people speak to cashiers or waitstaff. She left dishes in the sink towels on the floor and once asked if I could toss in her laundry since I was already doing some. I hadn't been. The final straw came when Max, all of 6 years old, wandered past my door and muttered to his sister, "That's the old lady's room. We're not supposed to touch her stuff." The old lady. That night, after they'd all gone to bed, I sat in my room, no longer a master, no longer mine, and took out a yellow legal pad. Across the top, I wrote in steady, capital letters, what still belongs to me. I listed the deed, my pension, the small retirement account they didn't know about, my name, my voice. The next morning, I placed a list in the drawer next to my glasses case and called the realtor I'd met with once years ago. They left on a Friday morning car packed with coolers and folding chairs ready for a weekend in the mountains. Melissa waved cheerfully, and Doreen promised they'd bring back something nice. Grant hugged me, briefly distracted, then climbed in behind the wheel. The children didn't say goodbye. As their taillights disappeared down the street, I stood at the window, not moving, until the house fell completely still. For the first time in weeks, there was no noise, no television echoing down the hall, no whining, no demands, just silence. I poured myself a fresh cup of coffee and pulled out the folder I had stashed beneath my mattress. The lawyer had been waiting for my signal. Now with the house empty, I sent the email authorizing her to proceed. Attached were copies of the deed, the original clause regarding controlling interest, and a signed letter of intent. Next, I called Marlene, the realtor I trusted more than most friends. Yes, I told her. We're moving forward, quietly. By noon, the locksmith arrived. A kind man in his 60s, he didn't ask questions. He changed every lock front, back garage, side gate. I handed him cash and thanked him by name. As he left, I watched him linger in the driveway, likely wondering why an old woman with trembling hands had just secured every entry point to her home. That evening, I sat at my desk with the envelope I had prepared. On the front, in my neatest cursive, I wrote to my son, who forgot, who taught him kindness. Inside, I tucked a letter, not angry, not bitter, just true. I told him about the armchair, the hallway photos, the guest room, the silence that followed being turned invisible in my own house. I told him this home had been my anchor, and they had tried to sever me from it without ever once asking if I was ready to let go. I sealed the envelope and placed it on the entry table exactly where I knew he'd find it. Then I turned off every light, locked the new deadbolts, and sat in the blue recliner that I had brought back from the garage. They arrived just after 6 headlights, sweeping across the driveway like searchlights. I heard the engine shut off, followed by the thud of car doors and excited voices, children arguing over snacks, Doreen barking orders about bags, Melissa saying something about a leaky cooler. Then came the pause. I imagined their faces the moment they saw the note taped to the door. Occupants not on title must vacate in 5 days. Below that, the contact number for my lawyer and the seal of the county clerk's office. There was a beat of confusion, then panic. What the hell? Melissa's voice pierced the air already, on the edge of breaking. Grant. The locks. What's going on? Grant tried the door. Once, twice, then banged harder. Mom, are you in there? Open the door. I stood just behind it, the solid wood separating us. I didn't say a word. Mom, seriously, this isn't funny. The code on the gates changed. We had groceries in the car. He didn't mention the letter. Not yet. He wanted to pretend this was a misunderstanding, maybe even a prank. But I knew the moment he read the fine print, the reality would hit him like a wave. I hadn't just locked them out. I had legally reclaimed the house. Melissa began crying, loud and messy. I heard her pacing. Doreen's voice came next, indignant and shrill, cursing under her breath. One of the kids started crying, and the other asked what was happening. I imagined their little faces, not understanding why Grandma wouldn't let them in, not knowing this wasn't about them. Grant pounded harder. You can't do this. We're family. I leaned close to the peephole and looked out. He was flushed hair, messy eyes, wild nothing, like the confident man who had stood in this same doorway days ago, dictating the terms of my own life. But I didn't open the door. I didn't even flinch. I turned away from the noise, walked to the kitchen, and poured myself a glass of water from the new pitcher I had bought the day after they left. Grant showed up the next afternoon, without warning, alone this time. His car screeched to a stop in the driveway, like he'd meant to intimidate the asphalt. I was sitting by the window, already dressed and ready for what I knew was coming. He knocked, not like the night before this was deliberate, controlled, pleading, "Mom, please." His voice was softer than I expected. "I just want to talk." I opened the door, but not wide, just enough that we could see each other eye to eye. He stared at me like I'd become someone else. "Why would you do this?" Why now? I didn't answer immediately. I waited until he looked down at his feet, uncertain the way he used to when he got caught lying as a boy. "You said this would be my house," he finally said, bitterness creeping into his voice. "You gave it to me." "No," I said, steady. "I gave you access, with the understanding that I'd be welcome, that I'd always have a home here. You do know, Grant. I had a room, a back room, after you gave mine away, after my chair disappeared, my photos, my name." He shook his head, angry now. "This is insane. You're tearing our family apart. Our family." I repeated the words sour in my mouth. "Did you think about family when you made plans without asking me, when you handed over my space to people who treated me like I was just in the way? You're twisting everything." "No, I'm remembering everything." That's when he lost whatever control he had left. He stepped back and started yelling about fairness, about betrayal, about everything I had apparently taken from him. His voice echoed through the neighborhood. I saw blinds shift, curtains move. I stood in the doorway, arms folded, letting him scream, letting the world see. When his throat finally gave out, when he was left gasping with red cheeks and clenched fists, I gently closed the door between us. Not to hurt him, to protect what was mine. The first call came from an unknown number just after breakfast. I let it go to voicemail. A moment later, another one followed, same number. I finally listened to the message out of curiosity. "Hello, this is Doreen, Melissa's mother. I think there's been some sort of confusion. We're all just very overwhelmed. If we could please talk woman to woman, I'm sure we can sort this out. I'm not trying to intrude. I'm just trying to help my daughter. Please call me back." I didn't. That afternoon, I opened Facebook to check on the community gardening group I still followed. A post caught my eye, Melissa's name in bold above a wall of text. She had written, "I never thought I'd see the day my children were made to feel homeless by their own grandmother. Some people have hearts that grow cold with age." Dozens of comments followed. Sympathy, outrage, a few judgmental strangers saying, "Family is everything." Not a single one of them knew the story. Not a single one asked what I had endured before I ever changed that lock. I took screenshots, every comment, every lie. I emailed them to my attorney with a short message for your records, in case we need to respond publicly down the line. I still prefer silence. Her reply came within an hour. "You've done everything right. Stay the course. The house listing will go live next Tuesday, as planned." It felt surreal, like pressing down on the gas after being parked for a decade. All those years spent moving aside, stepping back, deferring to others. All those years of quiet. Now, I was making decisions, not reacting to them. I didn't write back to Melissa. I didn't return Doreen's calls. I didn't try to explain myself to people who had never thought to explain anything to me. Instead, I walked through my house with a yellow notepad in hand, writing down which items I would take with me and which would stay for staging. I opened drawers, ran my hands over surfaces, and imagined how it would feel to live somewhere where no one knew my name. We met at the title company on a bright Tuesday morning. The sky outside was cloudless, almost mocking in its serenity. I arrived early, dressed in the same blue blouse I'd worn to Grant's high school graduation, back when he still looked at me like I hung the stars. He and Melissa arrived 10 minutes late. Grant's shirt wrinkled, Melissa's makeup already smudged beneath her eyes. The conference room felt too big for the four of us, me, them, and the closing agent, who smiled nervously, sensing the temperature before a word was spoken. Grant opened his folder but didn't look at the paperwork. "Mom," he began, voice low, "can we just take a breath here? Maybe push this back a few weeks. We've spent money paint, shelving the backyard fence. It's not fair to rush this." Melissa wiped her eyes and added, "The kids are devastated. They don't understand why you're doing this." I reached into my bag, pulled out my checkbook, and placed it gently on the table. I didn't open it. I didn't write a thing. I just looked them both in the eyes and said, "You already decided. So did I." The silence that followed was the longest I'd heard since the day I changed the locks. The closing agent cleared his throat and turned to the buyers. They smiled politely, glancing between the three of us like they were unsure whether they were buying a home or a family's history. But I knew what they were getting: a clean slate, a home without ghosts. When the final signature was penned, the deal was sealed. Grant sat back stunned. Melissa sniffled, but said nothing. There would be no more appeals, no more surprises. The house they'd assumed would always be waiting for them now belonged to someone else. I slipped the checkbook back into my bag and stood pressing both palms flat against the table. Outside, the buyers were already admiring the porch roses I had planted 15 years ago. I walked past them without a word, letting the spring air fill my lungs as I stepped into the beginning of my next chapter. The new house smelled like cedar and lemon oil when I opened the door for the first time. It wasn't large, just 2 bedrooms, a narrow kitchen with mismatched tile, and a porch that creaked when I stepped onto it. But it was mine. Every corner, every key, every choice. I unpacked slowly with care. No one rushed me. No one told me where to put things. I chose a soft sage color for the bedroom walls, bought a second-hand writing desk that reminded me of the one my father once used, and placed my sewing machine where sunlight touched the floor every morning. In the hallway, I hung paintings I loved, not family portraits, not school photos, but watercolors of boats and birds and wild blue flowers. The silence in this house wasn't empty. It was clean, full of room to breathe. I kept one photograph, just one. It's a picture of Grant at age 8, drenched from a summer rainstorm, laughing with his mouth wide open, arms spread like he was flying. I placed it on a small shelf in my bedroom beside a jar of beach glass and a ceramic bowl I made in a class last winter. I don't hate him. I never did. But I don't owe him everything anymore. That's the difference. Everything else I've given, home's second chances, rides to college forgiveness, for words never retracted I've released. What stays in my name is not the deed to a house or the balance in my account. What stays is my dignity. What stays is the quiet strength I found the day I didn't open the door. What stays is the story I get to write from here forward. I sit on the porch some mornings and watch the seagulls trace lazy lines through the sky, salt in the air, and warmth in my hands from my own teacup chipped familiar, and exactly enough. And when the wind blows through the trees, I don't think about who I used to take care of. I think about how, finally, I chose to take care of me.